I was funny because when I was trying to think of what to talk about today, that came to mind, the New Jersey show, but I had kind of vetoed it. So I'm trying to find images, but my computer is being very slow in pulling up PowerPoint, so I'll try and show you in a minute. But yeah, no, exactly along the lines of how Brad described it, is kind of how I would speak about it myself. That was maybe even. It's funny, I mean, Jean made this reference to like in internet time, like, 2008 is like forever ago or something, which I can kind of relate to about this project, because I think in internet time, it was a different moment where things like, there was a lot more kind of optimism about what it meant to have a blog, kind of before, in your kind of, the way you're characterizing, we feel sort of cynical about blogs now. I think it was still a moment where it wasn't clear how blogs were kind of drawing these lines in the sand in a way, maybe, or kind of making these kind of micro communities of content and sort of actually in the end ghettoizing things off from themselves. But I think that was a time in which, at least I felt as someone who had a really regular blogging practice, that there was like a much more kind of utopian spirit about the whole thing then, and so I was kind of, it was also, I think, before we got extremely cynical about the corporatization of media and Web 2.0, where people were just starting to get cynical, perhaps. So what I was thinking about most when I was imagining that exhibition was a Google image search, which at that time was like the only image search really possible. And I was thinking of how could you take the kind of randomization of content that happened in a Google image search and translate that into the idea of an exhibition. So that was kind of like my rough framework. But one thing that I will say about doing a show like that, that kind of, as Brad characterized well, was trying to break down those kind of hierarchical distinctions that I think happen in art, and to try and allow the base of participants to be much broader than what would happen in a normal art exhibition, was that like actually being there and actually being in the room with all of the people from the internet who materialized, and there was a lot of them, was for me as a curator like one of the just most amazing openings that I've ever gotten to experience because of that, because it really enacted the breaking down of certain social boundaries or hierarchies that I think really are very strongly maintained in the art world proper. It really kind of, for a brief moment, eliminated those in physical space. And that was really kind of nice, and maybe set the tone for how I try and think and hope to work in a lot of ways as a curator. But did you have more you wanted to say about your own stuff? Or should I launch into showing some of my stuff? Or, okay. Well, sorry, my PowerPoint now actually is frozen from trying to open some of those New Jersey pictures. But I guess I'll try and just orient myself inside some of those larger questions that we started with Sohrab and Jean were alluding to. I kind of, right when I graduated from college was sort of the very tail end of the .com boom in New York City. So I was one of those people who like had just graduated from liberal arts school and could suddenly be paid like $1 billion to like learn HTML, which I did. So I really like to think about maybe my entire adult subjectivity kind of being formed under these conditions. And I ended up working for a company that was making IKEA's first ever website, for instance. And it was like, it wasn't quite like the ambition of what the Google office is like alleged to be, but it was very much this kind of moment where everyone was a kid and no one understood what was going on. And like, they tried to make this like really crazy environment with like ping pong tables everywhere, and to try and reorient your energy and your notion around work and what the computer could provide in terms of constant access to work, to kind of turn you into this like human machine, productivity machine. And that really had a huge impact on me. And it didn't take long for me to really think that there was sort of a dark side to this, the way that that the internet was kind of being developed and monetized and corporatized at that moment. And so I started working more doing web stuff, web projects with cultural institutions at that point. So for me, there was like this real kind of bridge between doing something that had to do with the internet proper and understanding its kind of technological framework, to kind of switching over to thinking about how art could be represented on the internet. And one of the first jobs that I had doing that was for the Guggenheim Museum. And it was interesting because there was one guy there named John Ippolito who was kind of one of the early excited curators about net-based art. And in conversations with him, he would point me to things like Rhizome and kind of earlier models of internet art along the lines of some of the things that I think you guys maybe have already tried to allude to. And it was like, for me, looking at work that was so specifically trying to reflect on those kinds of technological conditions, I felt really alienated by, but it wasn't because I was someone who couldn't understand what they were addressing. It wasn't the way that I think I was interested in art that could open up to maybe broader social questions. And I felt that at that moment it was an art that was insularly asking questions that for me felt too narrow. And it was a long time, and embarrassingly a long time, before I could get into internet art. And I would say it happened at this moment where a shift occurred, kind of what Guthrie's piece is alluding to, where the shift occurred, where it was no longer about this kind of older paradigm, but suddenly the internet had become such a mass medium, and it had all of these kinds of systems and defaults that we were responding to, and that everyone kind of could understand in common as a language. I think it was not until that happened, and I felt like we were dealing with a truly mass medium in a way, that I could really get excited about what kind of this newer generation, I guess, of internet artists were interested in. Yeah.